Kate Stewart, the mayor in Takoma Park, and just want to welcome you all to this wonderful celebration of the 25th anniversary of Unification. Before we get into our program, I just want to say a few thank yous. First, thank you very much to Jim Douglas and everyone at Historic Takoma for pulling the program together, doing the research, as well as thanking the city staff, Donna Wright, our communications manager, Gerald Allen, our communications specialist, and our wonderful Jesse Carpenter, our city clerk, and of course, City TV. The importance of today really came home for me actually over the last week, and particularly this morning. Some of us were at the funeral for Chief Jimmy Jarborough this morning, and listening to the stories and how much he meant to our community, and then driving back talking about the history, just reinforced the importance of having events like this, to tell our history, to share that with each other is very important. And so I just really want to again extend my thanks to Historic Takoma and everyone who put together today. I'm also a really true believer in the fact that as leaders, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And in Takoma Park, that is incredibly true. And I'm very grateful today that we have the chance to focus on one part of our history, a very important part, and hearing from people who really worked hard and persevered to unite our city. The political leaders, the community activists, who really focused on how to improve the lives of the residents who lived in our community, whether it's to deliver better services to them, to have children go to schools in their neighborhoods, all the reasons why we work towards unification. Personally, my own personal story about unification is I had been living in Takoma Park for a while, renting on Philadelphia, and purchased my first home. Meg Finn helped me purchase my first home, like many Takoma Parkians. And I remember when we went to sign all the papers, it actually said the house was in Prince George's. And I was like, it is? I didn't even realize it. I live on the corner of Sycamore and Elm, and Claudine's here, and she knows that many of our houses, actually, the boundary went right through backyards and people's homes. And I remember signing the paperwork and Meg saying, don't worry, in a month, you're in Montgomery County. And I was like, that's right, unification's happening. And so I will forever know how many years I've owned my house, because it always coincides with the anniversary of the unification. And I just want to say particularly thank you. And you know, this is probably one of my last events being mayor in the city. And I do want to take a moment of personal privilege and just say thank you to the residents of Takoma Park for having the privilege of serving as your mayor these last few years, and to really thank Kathy, Bruce, and I know Ed is on video, because I truly believe we do stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And I want to thank you each, the prior mayors of the city, for all the work that you did that helped set up my time in Takoma Park and the success we were able to have. So thank you. Thank you all for joining us today for the program. And I believe I'm turning it over to Mr. Douglas now.
Thank you, Mayor Stewart. And I concur in all of the thank yous to the city staff, the Historic Takoma volunteers, and the citizens that have came today. It's everything that makes this look really good today is the result of the contributions of the city staff and the work of the city television folks. I particularly want to thank Mayor Stewart for this, because it was a conversation maybe a year ago or so that she and I had about things that we might start doing together as a collaboration between the city and Historic Takoma. And it was Kate who pointed out, you know, the 25th anniversary of Unification is coming up. We ought to do something about that. And thanks to her, we are doing something about that. In fact, we've done a number of things. We've started collecting a number of oral histories Some of the folks on the panel today, or all the folks on the panel today, we did oral history with, and many people who are on the audience and many others. And I hope we can continue to do some more. We've done information on our website. We've done information in our storefront window on Carroll Avenue. So it's been a sort of a process through the year of 25th anniversary and remembering all of these things. So a quick sort of summary of what we're going to do today. You have a program. I hope you can follow along a little bit. I'm going to give a very short overview of the history, just so we're all basically on the same page in terms of the key facts and dates and so on. We're going to have a conversation amongst the panelists about their role and their perceptions of the unification process. Then we're going to have an opportunity after that for people that are here in the audience to offer their own contributions. And there's a lot of people here who were active in the process of unification, who have their own personal stories to tell. So hopefully many people will be able to share those stories with us. And then at the end, we'll have a reception outside in the atrium so that anybody who wants to continue the conversation can continue that conversation. Before I jump into the, I should introduce to you, I guess, the panel. You see them in front of you, but and they're on your program, but let me introduce them. And I'm only going to do this in alphabetical order because that's the best way. So we have Chris, and they're not necessarily sitting in order. So we have Chris Fitzgerald, who lived on the former Prince George's side of the city and was very active in the citizen part of the movement. Tom Gagliardo in the middle here, who has been active, as many of you know, in many political campaigns over the years in the city, and served as corporation counsel for the city for a while under Mayor Abbott, and was also very active in the One Takoma and other activities. Bev Habada, who came first to the city as an assistant city administrator and then served as city manager, city administrator for many years. And in the middle of all of this, Kathy Porter joined the city council in 1991, and later became mayor, as you know. Ed Sharp, who is, do we have him on the screen? There he is. So Ed Sharp, joining us by video today, recovering from some surgery, was on the council starting in 1985 and then became mayor and was mayor during the principal parts of the time when unification took place. And Jan Schwartz, who many of you may know by virtue of being not only a citizen activist, but a small business owner for many years in downtown Takoma Park with her shop, and one of the early founders of the creatively titled Citizens for a Referendum to Unite Takoma Park in One County, a term that did not fit on one T-shirt. And finally, Bruce Williams, who joined the council 1993, and later became mayor after Kathy was mayor, and also very active in all of the unification work. Before I jump into the quick overview, let me recognize that there are a number of people who cannot be here tonight, this afternoon, who were very instrumental. And let me start with former Mayor Sam Abbott, who was mayor from 1985 to 80 to 85. And as we'll hear, one of the early strong advocates, Mayor Steve Del Giudice, who preceded Ed as mayor, Reno Allegretti, who was on the council for a while and also very, very active, and Norm Gleichman, also very active in working on this, all of whom have unfortunately passed and aren't going to be able to join us today, but we do not want to forget who they are. So with that, let me jump into a very quick overview, and I'll point to the back of your program. There's a timeline there, and so we're not going to cover day by day, year by year, but it'll give you some points of reference in some of the time frame here. And I'll run through some of the high points so that we don't have to kind of go into some of the the dates when we're talking. We can talk more about more conceptually. So I own this. So I'll point out that the Takoma Park from the get-go, from late 1883, when B.F. Gilbert first purchased land in what was then partly in the state of Maryland and partly in the District of Columbia. That's the sort of the beginning of the community of Takoma Park, and you can see there's a highlighted line there. The land on the right is in Maryland, and the land on the left is in Washington. So we started as a community that was divided in 1883. Gilbert went on to buy a number of parcels all around in what eventually became the town and then city of Takoma Park. But the next big purchase by Gilbert was in 1886, and this time he wasn't crossing the line between Maryland and District of Columbia. He was crossing the line between Montgomery County and Prince George's County. So the land on your left there is Montgomery County, and the land on the right is Prince George's County. To orient you a little bit, the right-hand side of that is essentially Elm Avenue, and the curve around to the left is Carroll, turning into Ethan Allen Avenue. So that's part of the next big part of what was then an unincorporated Takoma Park. And what was, for many years, that first map I showed you was known as Old Takoma, and this was known as New Takoma as a group. In 1890, the state of Maryland chartered the town of Takoma Park, and it became incorporated as a Maryland municipality. Gilbert bought more land, other people had land, and eventually got incorporated into what we know today as the town and then city of Takoma Park, partly in Prince George's County, partly in Montgomery County, a fact that really didn't matter that much for a long, long time, because the counties didn't really do a lot as counties, and most of the services that anybody depended upon came from the municipality. But over time, and this is an excerpt from a city publication from the mid-70s, you can see that the counties were doing lots of recreation, housing, taxes, various sorts of things that if you lived, so here's this city publication giving information to citizens. If you live on one side of the line, you call this county number, and if you live on that side of the line, you call a different county number, and if you live on the line, I guess you call both of them. So anyway, it's an indication of over time, over the decades of the 20th century, that counties became more and more important and were delivering more services that were not performed by the local municipality. So in the 70s, as we sort of begin this story, this is what the city of Takoma Park looked like. And again, that highlighted line from southwest to northeast shows the majority of the city. Looks, maybe 2/3 or so on the Montgomery side, and the rest on the Prince George's County side. So then we enter the mid to late 70s, and things began to change. There were a number of people, many of whom are here today, who started saying, this is a problem, we need to change this. Sam Abbott, as he ran for mayor, picked up on this and became part of his platform and program. And this early committee, the Citizens for a Referendum Unite Takoma Park in one county, was formed. Through the 1980s, there were many efforts. This was, again, required a state law to change the county line, so this required legislative approval, gubernatorial approval. Many efforts through the 80s, all unsuccessful. And many of the people that are here today were part of those efforts. And over time, momentum grew, and there was growing interest and understanding of the problems associated with being in a bi-county status. The real breakthrough came, and we'll talk about this with the panel, in the early 90s. As Steve Del Giudice had moved on to become a county council member in Prince George's County. We had a gubernatorial race and a Prince George's County executive race, all of which were open at that point, and people began to be more sympathetic to unification. So the dam really broke in late 93, early 1994 for legislative success, which resulted in that session, I believe, April of 1994. Legislature approved the bill, and the governor signed it. And I would say at that point that did not unify Takoma Park. What that did was create a binding referendum that would then be held at the next city election, which was the fall of 1995. Lots of effort in that period for success. Before that election was held in the fall of 1995, we went through a discussion about some portions of Prince George's County that were not in the city of Takoma Park, requested to join the city of Takoma Park. And on the map on the left, you'll see that circle. It's those areas down bounded by New Hampshire Avenue, Eastern Avenue, some of the Pinecrest area, and so on. And those three neighborhoods petitioned. There was a process that we can talk about that ultimately was successful. And so before the unification vote in the fall of '95, they became part of the city of Takoma Park. And then ultimately, with the success of the referendum, became part of Montgomery County as well. So the fall of 1995, we have the binding referendum. And in that election, none of the seats for mayor and council were contested, so all of the candidates for all of the seats were unified with what was then the One Takoma group to argue for the successful referendum. And I'll point to the ballot that's in the middle of the slide there. It was a complicated ballot, given the structure of the state bill, which was the Montgomery County folks had to vote no. They did not want to unify into Prince George's County, and the Prince George's County folks had to vote yes, we want to unify into Montgomery County. Had either of those votes gone the other way, they would have nullified each other, and there wouldn't have been unification. So I think a lot of the discussion in that 1995 campaign was explaining to people the right way to vote if you wanted that particular outcome. I also say that I think most of the discussion had been, up to that point, had been agnostic in terms of which county to unify into. We just want to be in one county. And at the time that this referendum came, then it was the decision was, no, we want to unify into Montgomery County. So it got focused on that. And then that they, before we jump to the actual, so then there was the overwhelming support for unification. There was about an 18-month period of transition then, when all kinds of things, all those county services that we mentioned before, had to be sort of merged together. So business licenses had to be conformed, and individuals had to change the addresses on their insurance policy and their mortgages, and school issues, which is a really big one, had to, where are all these kids that now go to school in Prince George's County going to go to school in Montgomery County, and so on. So it took roughly a year and a half to integrate all those kinds of things together until we got to July of 1997, when the actual unification happened. So today we now have a map that looks like this, with that county line, instead of a straight line on the right hand, jogging around and picking up the parts of the city that were originally in Prince George's County. So very quick overview on how we got to where we are today, which then turns us to the panel that we have. And we're going to try to go through somewhat chronologically on this, starting with really the question that I've been asked many times, which is, so what? Why did it matter that we were in two counties? What was the big deal about that? And let me start by asking Jan, who was one of the early organizers of the Citizens for a Referendum Committee. So why did it matter where you were, that you were in two counties?
It mattered a great deal because of the mandated school busing program that Prince George's had to be involved in with the integration, because the schools in Prince George's County were pretty black and they needed more white students, and so they had this horrible busing program. And many of my neighbors said, I can't afford to send my kids to private school, or they had to condemn their children to a 40-minute bus ride to and from. And they also had to have, and a lot of them just moved. Some of them moved across the line into Montgomery County, and some moved directly out of Takoma Park. It was hard for us. We were a small group of Prince George's residents that met. Larry Hush was our leader, and Ed and Sherry McMahon were part of it, Gene Freeman, and we worked very hard. We had a petition. We would go to the different festivals in the city and try to get people interested in the Citizens for a Referendum to Unite Takoma Park in one county. It was a title that would never fit on a T-shirt. And we worked for a while, and we lobbied in the state assembly. They were not interested at all. They kind of, well, of course Prince George's County didn't want to lose Takoma Park part, and Montgomery County was not real excited to see Prince George's County moving into Montgomery County. And I think what kind of got us going and gave us a second boost was when Sammy Abbott ran for mayor and was on his agenda.
So Chris and Kathy and Ed all lived on the
Jan.
Prince. In addition to Jan, all lived on the Prince George's side of the city. So in addition to what Jan just said about the problem with schools and the instability in the neighborhoods as people were moving, other issues that you all faced in terms of why did it matter to you that Prince George's?
It was, as I told you when we talked, it was about the schools for my neighbors and myself. How we dealt with the local neighborhood school was that a lot of our children, 2 of them here today, they went to programs outside of Prince. They both got on buses and traveled for the 40 minutes. They went to really good schools, though. They would say they went to good schools. Nina would, Nora, K through 6 there. Our daughter started in 7th grade. But we really worked hard to have them united. They had friends that were, their closest friends lived elsewhere. Their closest friends lived across the street, too. That helped. Went to the same school for a long time with them. But the truth of the matter is we had a lot of friends in our neighborhood, as Jan knows, that moved out because they didn't want to send their kids to the schools in our neighborhood. I mean, that was a constant problem for us with school-age children. And when we moved to Takoma Park, we weren't thinking about the schools. This is the house we could afford. We loved the neighborhood, and I wasn't thinking about the schools right then. And then you get to have a 5-year-old, and you're like, wait a second. So, and a 3-year-old or whatever. So my focus was really on the school aspect, not so much that, once in a while we'd call a taxi, as my husband reminded me, and the taxi would go to Central Avenue in Prince George's County because they didn't think there was a Central Avenue in Takoma Park. And they'd never come because that's like, in Capitol Heights. So our Central Avenue wasn't sort of seen as, we'd say Takoma Park, they'd think, no, that's in, this was before Unification. I'm sure it was a little bit after Unification, too.
So Kathy, you were president of South of Sosco at Citizens Association at the time, right? So on Elm Avenue. So
Right.
thoughts?
And I would say, in those days, whenever you asked a question of city staff, if you asked them about a zoning issue or a permitting issue, the first question they would ask in response is, where do you live? Because their answer was going to be completely different depending on whether you lived in Prince George's County or Montgomery County. It also, I remember there were all kinds of stories about, we had a situation once with a police officer who was held in contempt of court because he wasn't in court in one of the counties because he was testifying in a different court in the other county. So we used to run into this in my neighborhood. We ran into a lot of problems with the 911 issue. People would call 911 and people didn't understand where the line was. And so you'd be sent, we were in Prince George's, they would send us to Montgomery would send it back to Prince George's, and if it weren't an emergency, this was a really dangerous thing. And I remember the 911 issue actually continued to be a problem even after unification. We had to separately work that one out. But in my neighborhood, I would say the 911 issue was a really important thing. And I'd like to add one thing. In the time that I was on the council, we also did work on one of the local schools, Carroll Highlands Elementary School, which was in Prince George's County. And a lot of the parents and people who had young children who would soon be in school lobbied to get Carroll Highlands more money for new school building, lobbied to get them more staff. And so I think there was an effort among a lot of people in the community to try and improve the schools in Prince George's with the idea that the kids would be going there.
So Ed, let me ask you, you were also living on the Prince George's side. Thoughts on why unification was important to you?
I think for elected officials, and Kathy reflected a lot of that with her comments and examples, that's what we were emphasizing when we would talk about it, was the effect it had on the governmental aspects of living in Takoma Park, and the types of problems that the elected officials had in sort of keeping tabs on what was going on in both counties, because we had to do that to make sure that Takoma Park's interests were being protected in both places. I think there was, I said at the time that there was a split personality, and the whole capability that the city had couldn't be used to emphasize in just one county. We were dealing with both counties, and I think that reduced our effectiveness to some extent because we were split that way. So, I appreciate the points of view that Jen and Chris were giving, but I think that from the point of view of the elected officials, it was a different type of concerns that we were emphasizing when we would talk to people.
So Tom, let me ask you, you were active in Sam Abbott's first campaign, subsequent campaigns, he became mayor. So what was his perspective on this? Both, I guess, at the first race he lost narrowly, and then he won his second race, and then he was a champion of unification as mayor. So talk about him.
Sam lost his first race by 8 votes and his last race by 7, won the 3 in between. The reason he only served for 5.5 years is because the election date was changed from, is that loud enough? My favorite critics are the ones who are shouting this out. The reason he served for 5 years rather than an even number of years was because the date of the election was changed. And rather than add a year to the term when that conversion took place, he deducted a year. A vast difference between what happened in the more recent change of election dates. But that's the way Sam thought. So let me start by very briefly talking about his philosophy. Number one, he was a creative thinker. He thought outside the box. There was no idea that was foreign to Sam Abbott. If it made sense to him and it was good for the people that he represented, or at least is how he assessed that to be, then that was an idea he was going to work for. And he was an indefatigable worker. There was no turning Sam back no matter what. Now, that was both his strength and his weakness. He was a strategic thinker, and much of his thinking about unification was, if we're in 2 counties, we're begging twice. We're going to Montgomery County as a divided city, and we're going to Prince George's County as a divided city. So in both cases, we're weaker. Whereas if we were one city in one county, we go with a united voice. And that was a major motivation for him. He was well aware of the impetus of the school concerns and other things. But for him, it was a strategic decision. It was a way to achieve the other aspects of his platform. And his original platform had 3 major planks. One was unification of the city in a single county. The other was greater local zoning authority. And the third was an end to double taxation, now called tax duplication. Argue about the semantics. It's the same thing. So his view was that in order to achieve those other 2 goals, the first goal had to be realized, and that was the unification of the city.
And so were you part of the work he did? Well, you were corporation counsel for him, and so he tried to get support in Annapolis for unification as mayor. Talk a little bit about how that went or didn't go so well.
The real story should be told by Lynn Bradley, who's a former city council member sitting back here and criticizing me. And Lynn, I'm going to save that story for you to tell. But Councilmember Tom Hucker always says to me, the most important thing in politics is relationships. And indeed it is. And we had no relationships with the Prince George's delegation when we first started. But over the years, those things were built. And that's one of the big takeaways, in my opinion. That's one of the most important lessons learned, is that the way relationships were built. Another example of relationship building was Reno Aldrighetti and Lynn Bradley having a Maryland Municipal League meeting here in Takoma Park and having, what did we had? We had sandwiches or whatever. But we made it a social event. So people got to know each other as people. So it wasn't just, those crazies in Takoma Park who have this ridiculous idea of cutting off part of Prince George's and taking it away from us. It was Prince George's municipal officials understanding we're people, this is of value to us. And that was, again, another example of relationship building. So it changed over the years. It was a long, it was a 17-year legislative effort, okay? We could have quit after a year or two. People told us, it's ridiculous, it's a losing battle, don't bother. But Sam Abbott would never hear that. I mean, you might as well talk to him in a language he had no facility in.
So Bev, let me turn to you. Two things. You, first of all, before working in Takoma Park, you had a strong background in Prince George's municipalities, and you served as assistant and then city manager here. So picking up on the points that Ed was making about city services and duplicative work, talk about what it was like to try to administer a city in two counties.
We had to deal with two of everything: 2 county executives, 2 county councils, 2 planning boards, 2 state delegations, and all of them saw us in different ways. To the Montgomery folks, we were a population of 11,000 people. To the Prince George's County folks, we were a population of 6,000 people. So, we did not have the clout, the power. 25 years later, it's fascinating to watch Mark Eldridge as county executive. And you have Peter Francho as comptroller, and you have Kate Stewart now going on the county council, and you have Jamie Raskin, who now not only does he have a statewide recognition, but also nationally as well. So I think unification, 25 years later, shows that it was a good effort and a good bet that if the city were in one county, that the leveraging of power, political power, could be achieved, and it has been. And I'm glad that that we lived through it. 17 years.
So on the issue of just sort of managing the city on a day-to-day basis, we hear these stories that garbage that got picked up on the Prince George's side of the city had to go to a landfill in Prince George, and the references made to the police officers going to 2 different jurisdictions and working with 2 different, the liquor laws on one side of the city were different than they were on the other side of the city. So from just sort of managing your staff day to day, ordinances and legislation that the council was working on, how did that work for you?
You had to do a lot more work in terms of tracking what was happening where and what the issue was, and knowing how it applied in Prince George's County, how it applied in Montgomery County, who you had to talk to address issues. It was double the work, and I think that that was a big deal in terms of the amount of time it took to go through the number of issues that you had in front of you, from as was mentioned, the police having to be in 2 places at the same time that they couldn't possibly be. And we also had the issue of the fire station, where We had split on the Montgomery County Council. You had Rose Krenka and David Skoll voting together, and you had Esther Gilman and no, it was Esther Gilman and David Skoll voting together, and you had Scott Fosler and Rose Krenka who were in our corner. And when it came to the fire station serving the Prince George's side of the city, Esther Gilman and Dave Skoll had a fit about that and said, well, Prince George's side of the city is not supporting that station. No funding is coming. And so when it came time for our double taxation rebate to come, they put it on hold. And, I can remember Tom and Roger Titus and Jim Wilson and myself sitting down, knowing that after, that what we had planned in the event that they did that was to file suit that same day that they voted. And that's what happened. And then Paris Glendinning, who was the county executive for Prince George's County, jumps in and said, oh dear, we have a problem here. So what we're going to do, we're going to get creative on this split county thing so that the city is going to raise the amount of fire taxes from the entire city to pay Montgomery County, and Prince George's County will lower their fire tax rate so that the only taxes that were paid were being paid by Takoma Park residents. Everybody in the town was paying a fee, a tax to the town as a result of that lawsuit. And we were sending the money to Montgomery County for the entire coverage from the Montgomery County station right up the hill. So those kind of problems were, mind benders at times.
So if I can, I'll jump ahead a little bit. So that was the 80s in very simple terms. And then, as I noted in my earlier comments, things began to change. Steve DelGiudice was our mayor, and he ran for Prince George's County Council in 1990. Actually, I think he ran, if I remember correctly, he ran in the primary and lost, and then the nominee, Councilmember Secoria, was indicted, 5 days before the general election, and a write-in campaign was mounted at the last minute. Anyway, Steve was elected to the county council, left us as mayor. Bev.
One addition to that, Anthony Secoria was indicted, and the other candidate on the ballot was accused of some sexual impropriety at a nursing home. So, that election for Steve DelGiudice took place over, I think, 3 weeks, 3 or 4 weeks.
Or shorter, yeah.
Shorter time than that.
As a write-in candidate.
As a write-in candidate, yeah. And everybody got it. I can remember standing at a poll and handing somebody a pencil.
Right.
And they immediately knew. Give it to me. Yeah.
If I can add a footnote and quote Steve, who, even though once he became mayor, I had a very limited remainder of time to serve as corporation count. I had a very limited amount of time after Steve got elected to be city attorney, but he was kind to me, he really was. But here's what I want to quote Steve on. He said, I got to the county council, and he said, I knew I could count, and I counted the votes. And I said, my God, a majority of the council supports the unification at Takoma Park. And that began to break the log jam.
And so, Ed, let me turn to you. You became mayor in the fall of 1990 then, after that election. And then Kathy, a month or so later, was selected to take your position. So you came in as mayor at the tail end of a decade of failed efforts in Annapolis. Was this something that was on your political agenda for running the city, leading the city, unification, or were you focused on other issues?
Let me just say, first, I think that actually Tony Secoria was convicted at that point, and the issue was, when was he going to be sentenced? And that's what got the ball rolling.
Okay.
The unification. I mean, Sam Abbott had put it on the agenda, and that was an agenda item. It may be 1 or 1A for most of the time, but it was definitely on the agenda. I mean, there were other issues. I want to keep the fire truck and so on. But it was kind of beating your head against the wall until 94 when Glendenning was running for governor, and that's what. And maybe other people want to jump in and talk about that, but that's what broke the whole thing there. I said before that sometimes you can get things done in an election year you can't get done any other times, and I think this is a proof of that. That because he was running for governor, didn't care about what happened with regard to the unification issue anymore. His opposition went away, and as a result of that, I don't really think, as long as there was the opposition of the county executive to unification, that the state delegation was going to vote in favor of it. They did vote in favor of it in '94 because there wasn't that opposition. But I think that was the big thing that at that point that broke the dam. And seeing that was an opportunity that we needed to take hold of and really make a push. And that's what happened at that point. I don't know if I've jumped ahead of your story.
No, that's fine. So I'm going to turn to Bruce. You came on the council in the fall of 1993. You were right. So what was your introduction to unification?
My introduction was when we showed up for the first meeting for the swearing in of the new council. The new council consisted of 3 holdovers: Ed as mayor, Kathy Porter, and Mark Elrich. And then there were 4 of us new, so a majority of new folks on the city council. And we all got sworn in at the beginning of the meeting, and then the agenda said we were going to adjourn and all drive to Rockville and testify at the Montgomery County delegation hearing, where our state delegation was having hearings on their bills and other items of interest to residents in Montgomery County. So we all hightailed it up to Rockville after getting sworn in. And it was like, here we go. And what I hadn't remembered, but I looked back at some of the records that I have, that we spent 6 meetings in the 3-month legislative session in 1994. 6 of those meetings, the first item on the agenda was we were going to be in Annapolis lobbying for unification. So we went there for January 24th, January 31st, February 7th, and then at the end of the session, March 21st, March 28th, and April 4th. And then we came back, and the agenda said we would start our meeting here at 9 o'clock. And that's because our meetings were on Monday nights then, and the evening session of the legislature was always on Monday. And then the morning sessions were the rest of the week. So that was our chance to lobby officials. And I hadn't remembered that we started 6 meetings late at 9 o'clock because we were in Annapolis lobbying.
So, Bev, Ed mentioned Paris Glendenning decided to seek the Democratic nomination for governor in sometime in the fall of '93 for the 1994 election. So you were telling me about how you saw this as an opportunity.
It seemed to me that with Paris Glendenning's lack of interest, that for 8 years, whenever the unification bill came up, and it would start either in the Montgomery House delegation or the Prince George's House delegation, and if it started in Montgomery, it would pass, and it went over to the Prince George's County House delegation, they'd kill it. If it started in the Prince George's House delegation, they'd kill it, and that was the end of the session. And it went alternatively back and forth, back and forth. So with him out of the picture, it appeared, I knew that the way the process works in Annapolis, the bi-county committees meet in the fall for bi-county bills that have to do with WSSC and park and planning. And of course, with us being bi-county, we were on their plate as well. So I happen to know who chaired the bi-county committee for Prince George's, Mike Arrington. His father was Hank Arrington, who was the former mayor of the city of Seat Pleasant, where I first started out as a city planner. And so I invited them to dinner in Prince George's County. And I asked Mike if he would hold the bill in the bi-county committee. It was starting first in the Prince George's delegation that year in '94. if he would hold the bill in the Bi-County Committee of the Prince George's House delegation until we got our votes in the Prince George's House delegation. He said yes, he would. And so I came back to the mayor council and said, and gave them this information, and then we knew that we had some time to put together the votes for the Prince George's House delegation folks. And that time, that year, our own delegate, Pauline Menace, was chairing the delegation. So we had cooperation from her and a cooperation from Mike Arrington from the Bi-County Committee. And for me, that's when it all started to break loose.
Tom?
First of all, let me recognize Bev's contributions that are largely unheralded because so much of the work she did was as she just described, behind the scenes. And her relationships and her work with individuals, as she's just mentioned, and there were many others, was a critical part of our success. So I can't help but tell this vignette. I'm standing in the hallway of well, there are a couple of hallway stories. So I'm standing in the hallway with Peter Francho, and we're talking. And Pauline Menace, who Bev just mentioned, comes up and says, Peter, we really need a vote on some bi-county something or other, whether it was at WSSC or whatever it was. And she said, but we need votes in the Montgomery County delegation. How are we going to get them? And I looked at Peter, and Peter looked at me, and essentially, simultaneously, we said, unification. And Pauline said, okay. And we got through the House. The dynamics in the Senate were entirely different and very much pivoted off the Glendenning decision not to oppose unification in order to enhance his chances of getting the Democratic nomination. Once Mike Miller, who was the president then and forever before and after was the Senate president, he dropped his opposition. And Art Dorman, of local fame at that time, was going to kill the bill. And he said, what? Oh, whatever my president says, meaning Mike Miller. And we got it through the Senate delegation on Prince George's as well. By that point, it was pretty routine to get, as Bev said, to get the Montgomery County side votes. So real different dynamics, and it's all in the moment, it's all in relationships. You make your own luck.
So that period from late '93, after Glendenning signaled his intentions, and around that same period and maybe earlier, Steve had gained the support of his colleagues.
Of the council.
So on,
Right.
so the momentum was headed in the right direction. So that was, as Bruce described, those series of council meetings held in Annapolis. So that, 3-month period, or roughly 3 or 4 month period, each of you, I think, were involved in very intense lobbying of one way or another. So I just want to talk to everybody, starting with you, Ed. Sort of, what was that like, that period when it looked like actually this was going to be the moment, and going back and forth to Annapolis and phone calls and meetings and so on? What was that like?
I never actually thought it was going to happen until it happened. Tom mentioned what happened with Mike Miller, but Mike Miller was a little bit hard to read right until the end, and literally I think it wasn't the last night of the session that the bill was put up and then finally voted on. So I mean, I thought it was, I frankly thought it was down to the wire, and it really did turn on what Miller was going to do. So it was, there was a lot of hard work, and we were spending a lot of time down there. I remember one time it was Bev and Tom and I were in Tom's car and coming back, and his car broke down on the highway, and we were, we're sitting there. Tom and I remember, did we get a tow, or I don't exactly remember, but it was hard work, and part of it was cars breaking down on the highway. That was part of the whole deal.
I have to see, one of the big takeaways for me is how we all put aside our differences to make this happen. When Ed left the mayorship, Reno Aldrighetti said to me, "We got to go down there and thank him." Now that's how Reno thought, And I said, you're right, let's do it. Now, I wouldn't have thought of that, quite frankly, on my own. So Reno and I come down here and we congratulate Ed, and I said to Ed, I really appreciate all your hard work and all the good work you've done, but I do want you to know that I've never voted for you. Even when you ran unopposed, I didn't vote for you. But we did work hand in glove, Ed, and that was a great moment. Thank you.
Oh, I remember you telling me that, Tom.
I could say it about a few other people in the room, but probably better left unsaid.
So Jan, talk about, from the non-sort of governmental side, you guys were pulling out all the stops. So talk about
You mean our gimmicks that we had?
your gimmicks and your pressure.
We had one in a cold winter day. We decided to walk the line, which was very, very hard because, as we know, that line went through people's houses, it went through their yards, it went through the middle of a street, and it was not easy. And we had all dressed very warmly and had a big boom box with Johnny Cash singing, "I Walked the Line." And we ended up over at the Mulligans having hot chocolate in their kitchen, which was in Prince George's County, but if we wandered into the living room, we could have wine and cheese.
And you made many trips to Annapolis.
Oh, my goodness,
In
yeah.
that sort of
well,
not-
thanks to Tom and Reno, they said, you have time to go. So I went with another gal, and we went day after day, and they said we had to be present there to watch what goes on because it's so close. And if the legislators saw us there, that was an important. The other one that was a wonderful story was the 4th of July parade that we decided to have a van with signs on the side of it, and it was going to say Takoma Park Unification Moving Company. Now, this was a good idea, and most of the citizens got the humor, but the fellow that was announcing the particular floats and items on us said, "Isn't that interesting? We have a moving company in our parade." They didn't get it.
So Kathy, you were on the council and heavily involved in the lobbying in 93, 94. Adding to what Bruce talked about?
I think it's important to note, Bruce talked about how the council went down, and I remember that pretty much every week. But there weren't two efforts. It wasn't the council on one hand and the citizens group on the other. It was all one unified effort. And I think that was part of what was so powerful about it, because you would have 20 or 30 people going from office to office to office, and it included both residents and elected officials. I remember one time we went down there, and I think people would make appointments to see individual members of the delegation. And at one time, I think Jan had made the reservation, had made the appointment. And we got there and we said, we're here from Takoma Park, and they said, we don't have Takoma Park on the list. We don't have it on the schedule. And we said, well, this is the time we're supposed to be here. It said, no, let's see. On this time I have Juan Takoma. We said, that's us. And I also remember one point, one of the older Prince George's County members came up to me and said, I don't know. Don't know if I'm supporting this. You've got that crazy mayor. Who is that mayor you've got? And I said, oh, would you like to meet our mayor? And I brought Ed over, and Ed was wearing his bow tie that day. And Ed came up and shook his hand, and the guy stared at him. And he said, you're the mayor?
Let me add another thing. Being a school teacher, we were making valentines in my 4th grade. And I made a big valentine, and I said, mend our broken heart, unite Takoma Park, and then I cut it in half and sent it to Paris Glendenning.
If I can very briefly, and I know I'm talking too much, but, Jan mentioned hot chocolate at the Mulligans and then going over for wine and cheese. The fight for Prince George's County was a matter of identity, okay? It was, you'd look down on us, and that's why you want out. And of course, there was a strong reaction against that. And the reason I bring that up is because Jerry Devlin, who later became a district court judge, Jerry Devlin was a delegate, and he gave a speech once, and he said, you know what, we're beer and pretzels. you guys, Montgomery County is wine and Chablis, and that was deep-seated in the delegation. And when you think, let me quickly say, look at national politics. You think it's really about what kind of gun you're going to carry or whether you're going to have a permit. It's about identity. That's why those issues are so deep and so hard to solve. So we saw it on a local level, on a little bitty issue, but it's transcendent.
So, Bruce and Chris, the period of intense lobbying ultimately yielding success. Your involvement, remembrances of those periods, other than that long list of meetings in Annapolis?
I also remember being there in the daylight. I remember being part of a group of 20 people in the middle of the day on another weekday with Bev there, and I know we went into the Senate office building and spent a good deal of time chasing down people. And at some point, the reaction shifted a little bit from who are you and why are you here to, oh, Takoma Park people. We know what your message is. We agree. You don't need to spend much time with me. Go talk with somebody else. I'm convinced. And I just want to say a quick word about something that when, Tom, you started talking about the decision to invite some people and have some food and lobby them that way. It was interesting to me because some years later that had kind of slacked off, and we put together an effort for the city council in dealing with there were joint Prince George's and Montgomery MML groups, and we would have one or two meetings a year where we would have a joint meeting, and we always noticed that the Prince George's folks started their meetings with a half an hour to have food and have dinner together. And we said, that's a really good idea, and let's do that. And we started doing it with those joint meetings, and then the Montgomery County folks said, this really works pretty well, because we're trying to meet at like 6 or 6:30 and get from work and come to these meetings. So everybody started serving food, and Montgomery County kind of took on that tradition of Prince George's County of breaking bread with each other and having better results because of it.
I didn't lobby much in the way other people lobbied. I remember going with Reno's wife, Laura, to lobby outside when the kids were in school. And Marie Rizzo did a lot more right over there next to Lynn Bradley, did a lot more going down to lobby. But I went with her also. We also went with our kids once or twice. And I just remember it always being cold, to be honest. I mean, because that's when
Right.
we'd go down during the day, and because I was working part-time then, and so was Laura, and so we'd go down and be freezing, and we couldn't wait to do the lobby, and then run and get like a hot chocolate or a coffee, so some of it was social. But yeah, I mean, most of my work was more on the reconciling what occurred with the schools once lobbying on that issue and trying to keep people to stay in the neighborhood. I mean, when I look around our neighborhood where we live now, Marie and I and Nina and others that are here today, I am so happy to see all those kids at the bus stop, because our kids never had this bus stop on the corner where they all got on the bus and went to the same school. Our kids that lived in our section of Long Branch, Sligo, went to all these different schools, and a lot of kids went to private schools. So it just fills my heart with joy to see the kids going in, and we have so many children in our neighborhood now. And at the time when Marie and Laura, when we were living there, we didn't have this many children, because once they found it was Prince George's, honestly, I know you say it was brie and pretzels, but for young families, it was about the inequality between the Prince George's County schools and Montgomery County schools. They were spending so much more money per pupil, Montgomery County. They had more resources. It's sad, but my kids got a very good education in Prince George's County for the time they were there.
We can't underestimate the contribution of Marie and her late husband, Norman.
Absolutely.
I mean, they were absolute stalwarts, and Marie served also a term on the city council.
So let me move this along and talk about this annexation that I mentioned in my comments. So sort of the last minute, and those of you who are both Bev as a city manager and you in the council, you got requests from, I think, 3 different neighborhoods. And I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on this, but it seems like that was a potential monkey wrench getting thrown into the system, that at the last minute, it was perceived by some as a land grab by Montgomery County to take even more land from Prince George's County. So, any thoughts or comments on what that process was like and how you resolved the issues associated with that?
I think it's important to say the ward that I represented was right in Prince George's County, right next to some of that property. And I think it's important that the people who lived in those areas had talked about annexing into Takoma Park. They talked about it sort of in general, in theory, and had been for years, but sort of nobody got around to actually doing it. But once the unification bill got passed, one of the parts of the bill was, once the unification took place, we could not annex any more territory from Prince George. I mean, for obvious reasons, that would create another whole problem. And so suddenly there was a deadline. I mean, these people who sort of thought generally they'd like to be in Takoma Park someday, suddenly there was a deadline. You either did it by this deadline or you could never do it. And deadlines really focus and bring things up in your priority list. And that's exactly what happened. They realized this was their last chance forever. And so they got it in gear and did it.
And I remember one of the tongue-in-cheek slogans that we had when this annexation was being considered. And we would talk to other municipal officials, and they would say, what is this, and describe, and what are you annexing? And we would say, we're annexing all the way to the bay. And they would get a look of horror, and they would laugh and explain. It was also interesting to me that once because like Kathy, my ward butted against a lot of the area that wanted to come in. And they said, we don't get any services from Prince George's that cross New Hampshire Avenue because they look at that as a hard boundary. And so if we don't join with you, they're still not going to cross New Hampshire Avenue, and we're going to be abandoned. But some of them, once they started the process and signed petitions, some of them had second thoughts, and they came into the clerk's office and said, can I remove my name from the petition that's been submitted? And the clerk said, no, you can't. So they began to realize that this might cause their taxes to go up. And that led to some other difficulties that kind of soured the relationships going forward.
Ed and Bev, any thoughts on annexation?
Ed, I'll defer to you first. Yeah.
I think when the proposals were originally floated, I know my reaction was, oh no, it's sort of along the lines that you were suggesting, Jim, that it was going to look a little bit like a land grab, and what would the reaction be? But as we thought about it, the fact of the matter was there was nothing anybody could do to stop us if we wanted to do it as a legal matter. The unification vote was set to occur. We had under state and county law, we had the right to go forward with these things. We, in fact, didn't even have to have a vote of the residents in the areas to be annexed unless the county council, Prince George's County Council, required it. And we were prepared to go ahead because we were absolutely certain what the result was going to be. And it was the Prince George's County Council insisting that we have the vote that required it to go forward. That was the process that got going. I will say two things about the vote. One was that we split it up into 3 sections of the areas that had petitioned us, because we thought that there were a couple of the areas it was very clear what the outcome would be, and then there was a larger area that it was a little less certain. And so, we didn't want to lose a couple of the areas to the third larger section. One of them was actually Westmoreland Avenue extended. Westmoreland Avenue was half in Montgomery County, half in Prince George's County, and the garbage trucks from Prince George's County that picked up the garbage for those residents in the county had to go through Montgomery County to get to them because it was a dead end. That was part of the irrationality that we saw and a reason that it made sense to do this. And also, when you look at the map that you showed, Jim, it's a lot straighter now because it goes down New Hampshire Avenue and Eastern Avenue. So I thought just as an aesthetic matter, it made a lot of sense to do this.
Bev.
I think city staff, I was particularly concerned, scared, that we couldn't get it all done before, a charter, annexation charter resolution. It takes 50 days, and then the Prince George's County Council made us take a vote. We had to get that done in 3 separate areas to vote, and had arranged for that, and had to get it all done in time so that the new people who were coming into the city could vote. To screw that up in terms of, they come in, but they don't come in on a timely basis, and then they're still in Prince George's. It's like, golly. So, yeah, the timing was scary from staff perspective. And it was, one of those cardiac kids moment. I'm working for people who just wanted to go and do crazy stuff.
You talked about the mayor and council.
Yes.
Just to be clear.
Yes.
So before we move on to sort of the implementation piece, one question. Did any of you ever think it was in doubt that the referendum would not pass to unify? I mentioned that sort of complicated ballot question, and I know all of you that were on the council were working hard on that election, but did anybody not think it was going to pass?
I think there was some concern that because of the wording,
Yeah.
that people's intentions would not be carried out because people would be so confused by the wording on the ballot that they wouldn't vote the way that would correspond to what they intended. That was the concern.
That was the question. Okay.
I think that Norm Blackman's referred to by Tom. I think his effort, Marie's and others on that aspect of it. I think that from my point of view, when we got the unification bill passed, then it was the responsibility of the citizens of the city to decide how they wanted to vote. I knew how I wanted to vote, but I didn't view it that I was going to go out and campaign for that vote. It was at that point the citizens make their decision. I didn't have any doubt how it was going to come out. I know that there was a little bit of surprise on the Montgomery side once they saw that it got passed on the Prince George's side, and that there was some regret that we're going to have this influx of students from Prince George's County now coming into the Montgomery schools. Relatively small amount, but I can still remember an encounter at the Blockbuster where I was standing in line, and a Montgomery resident was coming up to me and saying they were very unhappy with this because they just didn't want those kids coming in. But I never thought it would not happen.
Okay, so let's talk about a couple issues related to implementation. First of all, as I mentioned, a number of things had to change for people, for residents, and for businesses. And Suzanne Ludlow, who was was she your deputy or assistant at that point, Bev, or a planner?
She was a part of the Department of Housing and Community Development.
So she led this
as a
big
staff person.
task force between the city and the two counties to do this transition. And I think Suzanne is out of town this weekend. She wasn't able to join us, but talked about some major and some minor issues. Bev, any sort of the big points on trying to get everybody in sync and harmonized between the two counties?
We had a number of issues to work through. We had 2 liquor stores in the Prince George's side of the city versus Montgomery County having their own the liquor, services, I would say. And so that took 2 years, so that it ended up being the Prince George's County liquor license had some value, and those folks who owned the liquor license could still sell their liquor license to other liquor establishments in Prince George's County. Education obviously was a major concern because Montgomery County allegedly did not have the capacity in county schools to accommodate Takoma Park students, and so for a while they didn't have room to accommodate them in schools in the city, so they had to be bused elsewhere. We had the planning and zoning issues was a biggie. 911 calls, the telephone company had to go in and actually arrange to have new codes for every Prince George's County home landline so that they could be sure that they went to the right 911 system. The rec center on New Hampshire Avenue was run by Park and Planning in Prince George's, but Montgomery County had a different system where there was a separate county Department of Recreation, so the city took over that rec building. One thing.
After the Prince George's Park and Planning had stripped it of all the furnishings.
True. Prince George's County was helpful on one thing, and that is their Department of Health and Human Services in addressing their constituents would allow any pregnant women who were seen by doctors in Prince George's County to continue staying with those doctors until the end of that they had given birth, so that there was no issue of forcing them to go to two new doctors in Montgomery. And I think that was pretty much the major things, and probably others can chime in. But we had a bunch of teams internally dealing with every agency in Prince George's and Montgomery to try to make things happen.
There was one additional issue I remember that just applied to my neighborhood, the South of Sligo neighborhood. We didn't have a bus that went from our neighborhood to the Tacoma Metro. And this went back years before unification. And finally, after working with the Prince George's Department of Transportation for years, we finally got them to agree to pay ride-on, to have a ride-on bus come through the neighborhood, through the Prince George's County Park, into the Tacoma Metro. And then, of course, when we unified, Montgomery County said, Prince George isn't going to pay for it anymore, so we're not doing it. So we basically started all over again. And it took us another number of years. And it actually wasn't until Ida Rubin, who was our senator at the time, called, I think you and I went into her office, and I was mayor and you were city manager, and we went to her office, and she called in the Secretary of Transportation and said, these nice folks in my district. She was the chair of the Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee. She said, these nice folks in my district would like a bus, and he said, yes, Senator, and we got a bus.
So let's go to the schools issue, and Chris, so this in some ways is still an issue today in terms of we don't have any infrastructure on the eastern side of the city. And so can you talk a little bit about the process of...
Well, the whole process was, as Bev said, we can't fit any of your kids into any of our schools in elementary. What they were able to do was take the middle school age kids and the high school kids into Takoma Park Middle School, or Eastern, if they went into a program there, and to Blair. But children like Eve Gleichman, Marie's daughter, had to go to Pinecrest along with Petey, Nina's brother. Nina chose to stay in Prince George's County because she went to Roosevelt High School and she wasn't going to switch. What were you, a junior in high school or a sophomore? Sophomore. So that's one good thing that PG said. If you like the school you're in, Nick stayed a year too, right, Marie? At Pullen. So they stayed. And but their kids could not be accommodated in Takoma Park, so they had a bus that went to Pinecrest. And then, so our kids did not go to any Takoma Park schools. They were outside of that. My daughter started in 7th grade. She started at Takoma Park Middle School, which ironically enough was up in Bethesda because they were renovating it, so she still was on a 40-minute bus ride. But the difference is she was with her friends that she had been friends with since she was 2, but went to different schools than her. So she was not a stranger in a strange land because she did have friends from playing soccer and doing stuff on the Takoma Park Montgomery Sound. But I couldn't believe she finally got to go to the Takoma Park Middle School, and it's on Tuckerman Lane. So that was 2 years of her never going here. But I mean, that everybody in Takoma Park had to go to Tuckerman Lane. That was in middle school then, because they were renovating Takoma Park Middle School. And then our son got to go to Blair in 9th grade. So anyway, I just think that it was, but there was a whole lot of, I was on a committee with many people from Montgomery County around these issues, mostly PTA people, one of them being Maureen Feely-Cole and Sally, from South of Sligo. What's Sally's last name, Kathy?
She's here.
Right there, Sally Tabor.
Sally Tabor, she knows all these stories.
Right.
Yes, about the whole thing with the kids, and yeah, we worked really hard on those issues of integrating the kids into the community. And now it's just a brief memory because they all go to school together.
So it's probably a whole separate program, but at the same time, the Blair cluster was changing, and the notion of the Down County Consortium was coming in, and so on. So there were a whole bunch of different issues going on in southern Montgomery County with schools at that time. Which,
But we didn't have that with, like, my age
Right,
group
no,
kids.
but
There
it-
was not that consortium then.
right. So as we move to wrapping this up, any thoughts more about the implementation issues or transitioning from the vote in 95 into, all right, so
Well, two
go ahead,
things.
yes.
Jan and I have talked about this, and anybody else that was in our neighborhood. Our Geico insurance went down immediately. I'm not kidding. We said we live in Montgomery County. Okay, that's this much less money. I said, we didn't move. I mean, but suddenly Montgomery County was so much safer than Prince George's County, and we had not moved our home. Truth. And everyone on our block in the fall of that year had a jury duty for Montgomery County. We were like fresh meat. Reno got called, Laura, Barry, myself. Jan, didn't you get called?
Oh, yeah.
No, we all said, what happened? We all got jury duty. It was pretty funny. So not only our insurance went down, we also had to go to court.
Okay, so as we close up this, I have sort of two questions for each panelist, and we'll just go down the line. So two broad questions, and you can take them however you want to go, but I do want to make sure that we do it as succinctly as we can. So first of all, a number of you have already reflected on sort of implications and why and lessons learned and so on, but any final thoughts on that? And then thinking about this as an example of what makes a municipality different than an unincorporated part of, say, Montgomery County. So what we think of the Takoma Park community, and we certainly have the joint community with our neighbors on the Washington, D.C. side and so on, but there also is the formal incorporated city of Takoma Park, and some things happen inside those lines and some things don't happen inside those lines. And some ways it's a perennial debate that this community has about, is it worth it to be separately incorporated for whatever reason. So I think it's an opportunity for each of you who've been elected officials, staff, citizen, community activists, and so on, to think about what does this tell us about being in a city versus just being in a county. So Ed, I'll just go down the line in order here. So Ed, you want to talk, final thoughts, reflections, observations on all of this?
I don't know that I'm actually going to answer your question
Well, it's your time. So you
directly. I do want to just say that I wanted to just give a shout out to Peter Francho and his help in this regard. He was kind of the strategist that I talked to a lot when we were dealing with the state delegates in terms of how we would go about talking with them and where the pressure points were and so on. I know Bev had her own contacts, but I worked with Peter pretty closely, and I felt that he really did help a lot in that regard. But on the larger question, I think it's pretty clear that the type of things that we were able to get done were because we had a city structure and we had staff that we could call on, citizens who had an identity with a municipality that was more than just the fact that it was a city government. I mean, it was, Takoma Park is sort of a state of mind in some ways. And, I do think that really does does make a difference in what people can accomplish. There needs to be more of it in Montgomery County, and I think county council, periodically doesn't want that to happen because they would see some of their capabilities stripped away a little bit. So I do think there's a value to it.
Jan?
Well, we were there the day the measure finally got accepted. And Senator Dorman, whenever we go over to talk to Senator Dorman, he was not available. And that day, he came up and gave my friend and I a fingernail file, a paper fingernail file with his name and his telephone number.
So you made a difference. You are now important.
Oh, we were now important, yes.
Takeaways. I think takeaway from me was that if you are working with a group of members of the community and you all were organized together and working together, and one of the things I learned from Reno Aldigretti as my mentor in terms of community organizing, and that is you rely on the base of people to make the impact on the elected officials. And when they're in front of the elected officials over and over again, as we were multiple Monday nights in Annapolis, it has an impact. And it did have an impact. And even though it was scary at times, I can remember the time that we got word that Senator Dorman was maybe not in our corner. He was on the Prince George's delegation. And back then, you didn't have email. We had a phone chain set up so that somebody would, call somebody and the phone chain would start. And we learned that he wasn't going to support, and for some odd reason. And he was our senator. And so we called the phone chain, and they started sending, phone calls his way, saying, passing back the information that you had heard about what somebody had said that he had said. And never forget him calling City Hall, angry, And I talked to him, and I said, well, Senator, that's not what we're hearing. And, the citizen effort in this made it happen. We had Glendenning moving off stage. We had certain folks holding the bill in committee. We had, support along the way. But really, the folks who were on, making the difference were the folks who were trooping down there, who were residents of Takoma Park, and making it happen. And from the beginning days of unification to when we finally got it. And it was a scary ride all the way through. When we got to Mike Miller, and I was about to cry, because it was like, here's one person who can stop the whole thing, Yep. And that was the scariest thing, because you have to realize that the Montgomery House delegation and the Prince George's House delegation were open meetings, and they voted in public. The Senate, the Montgomery Senate delegation voted in public.
Yeah.
The Prince George's Senate delegation did not. They went to a restaurant, and had a couple of beers or whatever they did, food and beers or whatever. And the word we got back was, "Oh, I don't remember what we said," because you couldn't hold them accountable. And so at the very end, you really didn't know what Mike Miller was going to do. Really, and that was the scariest thing at all. And then it happened,
Yeah.
That's right.
Kathy?
I remember during the time I was mayor, after unification, every couple of years, I would get a call from some municipality in Maryland that was divided between two counties.
Yes.
And they'd heard about unification. They wanted to know how we did it. I think they thought there was like a magic word or something that if they said it, they'd be unified. And so I'd explain. I talked about the 15 years, and I talk about the organizing, and I talk about, and usually at the end of the conversation, they'd be something like, well, we'll get back to you. It really was a tremendous all-encompassing effort, particularly for those last few years. And I think that the thing I came away with was that this really was, the purpose was unification, but the outcome was unification.
Yes.
Because I think this would never have happened if Sammy Abbott hadn't come up with this very creative idea. And it never would have succeeded if Steve Del Giudice had not had the pressure points and leaned on them so effectively to get the opposition from Prince George's basically to sort of cave. And the process of lobbying, I mean, Tom mentioned that some of the people involved in the lobbying, like the two leaders, for example, himself and Ed, didn't see eye to eye on everything, but they worked together so effectively and so well and incorporated so many other people, all of whom didn't necessarily agree with each other on everything either. But it was just such a unifying effort. The effort itself pulled together so much of the community and was so effective because it did that, because all of us were working on the same thing, all of us cared about the same accomplishment. And I think that's really what struck me about the success of this effort.
The famous German philosopher Hegel said the only thing we learn from history is that we don't learn. So let's be the exception to his maxim. Organize, stand together, be bold, don't quit, believe in yourself, win.
Exactly.
I came to the realization in more concrete terms than I had had before in my life that the level of government closest to the people is the best level of government. And that's why I appreciate being in a municipality and fighting for a municipality. One of the things that I learned in this effort was the value of being able to lobby well. And I think I and a bunch of other people put that into practice for decades after this effort to get good things for the city and good things for other entities as well. And one anecdote that I'll close with. I trust my memory on this. I think I have this correct. That at some point in this process, Mike Miller said Takoma Park would be unified over his dead body.
Oh, he did say that. I remember that.
And I had the opportunity a number of times to talk with Senator Miller and to sit next to him when there was the chance to just have a little aside. And I always refrained from saying, Senator Miller, the reports of your death are premature.
Well, it's hard to add to anything that has been said, but I have loved living in Takoma Park for over 39 years, and I love that we live in a town where it's a it's a town. We have our own mayor and we have our own city council people, and we are a very activist community. As Bev said, we've had Peter, we've had Tom Perez, we've had Mark Elrich, we've had all these people be from our city and continue to be activists in the political arena. Jamie, of course, being number one, in my opinion. So I just love our town, and I'm so glad we're in one county.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you all. We have some time to hear from those of you who weren't able to be on stage, or those, and many of you have been pointed out. Anybody want to step up? And we've got some mics that are going to come forward. If people have anecdotes, remembrances, comments, questions for the panelists, we'd be happy to take them. Lynn? Jen? Hold on. And could you
might be able
just
to hear me
identify
anyways.
yourself? So
I'm Lynn Bradley. I live on Maple. I used to live on Flower.
Former
there's-
council member.
Former council member. It's interesting to see the phase, because I was more involved in those early years, and to see, like, sort of trying to tap at the ice and break it, the heavy lifting of that ongoing lobbying, that just the grinding lobbying that you have to do on a big issue like this, and then the implementation and the practicalities of it. It's interesting to think about this. One little comment is, I think that Ed, where are you? You know, Sam used to wear bow ties as well, and while you both have reputations, for good or bad, Sam was often known or remembered because of being arrested and pulled out of like anti-freeway fights and fighting for the metro and so forth. And because of other work I was doing, I got to know some of the state police in Annapolis. And one day, Sam was early on going to testify before the Prince George's County delegation. And so this state policeman, I'm standing in the back of the room, and this state policeman comes in, and I go, "Why are you here?" Because they did not usually have 2 or 3 state policemen at a general public meeting like that. And he said, "Well, we were alerted that there might be this guy testifying that could disrupt, and, you know, we might have to do something." And I said, "You mean that man there?" And he looks up as Sam was testifying, and he goes, "That old man is going to bother us?" But one last comment is that the hardball all along was certainly an education for me, and Bruce or some of the rest of you, what we learned from that, whatever phase we were involved in. Because as taking Glendenning as the main example, it was really hardball. You know, he threatened to take away the double taxation from the Prince George's municipalities. There were other things on the delegation. I remember at one point in one of the votes, it was close to a tie. And if it had lost, it would have been dead for X number of sessions. And so we were meeting with a particular delegate who will remain unnamed, who said, "Well, I'd like to vote with you, but, you know, the county executive really doesn't want us to, and I have other things to do besides your unification." And he said, "What do you want me to do?" And I have to confess, I said, "Tell them that your car broke down on Route 50 and don't show up, because then it's a tie vote." And it was that kind of heavy-duty thing that I'm sure all of you did in different ways with some of these folks that was really quite an eye-opener, and the different styles between the Montgomery County white wine and brie versus the Prince George's beer and pretzel image, which really was false. And I think that the issue of kind of white Montgomery County coming to Prince George's had to be sensitively dealt with.
Yes.
Which so many of you did, and thank you.
Other comments, questions, buddy?
Would have been the first meeting you didn't speak at.
I know, and this is the biggest mistake. Never give Buddy Daniels a microphone. They'll tell you that.
Take it back.
Bottom line, first of all, hi everybody. And it's so good to see everybody. It's great to see you, Ed. And Lynn, it's great to see you. Hearing about Paris Glendenning in 1994 gubernatorial election. He ran for governor. He was going to lose the governorship then. Ellen Sauerbrey had him beaten. As of 12 o'clock election night, they were losing. I was sitting in a consultant's office on 6th Grant, giving artificial respiration to a bottle of tequila, frankly. And the bottom line is 6,000 votes had not come in from Takoma Park yet because they were stuck on Twinbrook Parkway. There had been a car accident and Twinbrook Parkway went into the Board of Elections. As of 4 o'clock in the morning, Glendenning won by about 6,000 to 8,000. But he won the election basically because of the votes out of Takoma Park. And the 4 precincts here delivered, as I said they would, and kept reminding me of that. I was chair of the Takoma Park Democratic Caucus at that time. It was also my pleasure to work with everybody, lobbying and to work. Everybody worked so hard to get this unification situation done, and I learned so many lessons. I got to see my friends in Annapolis too, but it was such an honor and a privilege to work with you. And one other thing, the mayor said it today that Takoma Park is such an incredible city, and everybody said that on the panel. The Jarbos, the Daniels, the Boatmans, the Daws, all the families that made up this city in the 50s and 60s, and all these families, look what everyone created. And of course, with Jimmy Jarbo, our fire chief, passing, it has brought back so many memories over the years, and we've been reminiscing this week about it. So, but thank you so very much. Thank you for what you all have done, and thank you for putting up with me 25 years ago.
Thanks, buddy. Other thoughts, comments? Claudine? Kathy?
I'm Kathy Mack, and I've lived on Maple Avenue for about 47 years. And I remember a lot of these incidents, and I wish I'd worn my One Takoma t-shirt. It's at home. I want to thank you all for having this event for the 25th anniversary of Unification, when a lot of us can attend. If you'd waited to like the 50th anniversary, many of us would not be able to be here. So thank you very much.
Sue Silver also had a lot to do with that. I wonder if you have any thoughts, Sue.
Janet, can you bring the mic down to Sue?
So you have a helper, Jim. So you have a helper.
I've been trying not to talk because this has been such a wonderful panel, and Jim, you've been a wonderful moderator. But I really do think unification is sort of made all the difference for us in terms of our ability to have some unification, obviously, some power, some identity together. I was, as city attorney, the beneficiary of this work, and I'm enormously grateful to all of those who put in all those hours, all that time, all that creativity, and to so many who are now no longer with us, but I guess they are. You know, Sammy, of course, and Steve, and Reno, Norm. I'm probably forgetting some, but it reminds us, you know, sort of how our work is so important as we do it, and how much it matters for those behind us. So thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Anybody else?
Jim, one story, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
On the night of the unification vote, and, you know, staff was running the election and process. And I had told the city clerk, Kathy Sartoff, I said, would you please give me a heads up to let me know the outcome, because the county executive wants to come over to congratulate us. And it would be embarrassing if he came over to congratulate us and something went south. And so the reassurance that we had as staff is that we knew that there were citizens like Norm Gleigman and Marie Rizzo who are out there explaining the ballot to people so that they knew how to vote. And so when Kathy Sartoff called me from upstairs and said, we're fine. And then the county executive called from his car and said, can I come in? And I said, yes, we're good. From beginning to end on this, from the very beginning days to the absolute end of it, of getting it voted on and through, was just a monumental task by the folks who lived in this community. And I think the folks who should be congratulated, everybody who had a role in from beginning to end, raising the issue and then getting it through the legislature, and then the vote, and then the transition. And 25 years later, it's amazing to see, oh yeah, Mark Elmrich got reelected. Oh, Kate Stewart, the mayor, is going to be on the county council. Gee, isn't that something? It's just amazing to me, you know.
When we started the unification effort, not only were there not any Takoma Park residents in public office outside of the city, there never had been. Peter Francho was the first Takoma Park resident elected to an office other than a municipal office.
Bruce?
I just wanted to remind folks that one of the outcomes of this was that the next thing that had to be fought for was tax duplication. And it took another 25 years to do that. And I want to thank Mayor Stewart and everybody who worked on that to make it happen. It was my one regret when I retired from office that that hadn't been accomplished, because I put a lot of effort into it, and so did a whole lot of other people. And it would have been easier to have fair tax duplication much sooner if we had unified into Prince George's County.
That's probably right. That's probably right.
Yeah. One more time, anybody, comments, final points, anywhere in the room? Okay, thanks, everybody, panelists, those of you who came today. Couple quick things. Historic Tacoma has put more information on their website about unification. I mentioned that we've been doing oral history interviews with folks, and we're going to continue to do more of those, and eventually we'll make those available as well. We do have a window exhibit that'll be up for another week or two. And let me just close by saying to me, the importance of this program was not so much, the content was fascinating, and I really enjoyed the last few months putting it together, but also, with few exceptions, most of us have been in this town for a long time, but there's a lot of people who have not. And there's a lot of people who do not know that, things weren't always the way they are in the last 5 or 10 years around here. So I think this has been eye-opening even for those people who are not in the room today to read about it and learn about it. But there's so many other things about the town that's also true of, and the mayor mentioned in her comments that we were visiting earlier today after Jimmy's funeral, about the fire department, for example, has this fascinating history of going way back to the late 19th century and in different formations as a municipal department and as a volunteer department, as a county department in different locations and so on. That also, I think people don't really appreciate sort of how that's evolved and the different roles that the different governments have played. And there's so many stories like that. So for me personally, I think this is a great way to start what I hope is a long-term effort by Historic Tacoma working with the city to help explain the roots and the backgrounds, A, because it's interesting, but B, because maybe you might be able to learn something about it and maybe not repeat some of the mistakes or repeat them in a different kind of way. So again, thanks to everybody for coming. There's reception outside, so please come have informal conversation, and thanks again.
Great job.